som fortæller os, at vi er gået i gang. Velkommen til alle dem, der sidder med ude på Zoom, og til dem, der måske hører med her, når vi forhåbentlig bruger den her optagelse til en masse spændende ting ude i fremtiden. Men velkommen til det sidste af vores online arrangementer her i løbet af den her konference, som vi i Jødisk Informationscenter og Mino Danmark har kaldt Nothing About Us Without Us, og som handler om repræsentation af minoritets etniske borgere i det danske mediebillede. Vi har haft et par arrangementer tidligere, et med Aydin Sohi, og i sidste uge havde vi med Karen Valtorp og Marvish Ahmad, der talte om nogle forskellige ting, og i dag så har vi så besøg af Cora Alexa Døving, hele vejen fra Oslo, som vil være med i dag til at snakke lidt om repræsentation i medierne af både jøder og muslimer i Norge. Så lidt et udenlandsk perspektiv i dag, men vi håber at se, om der ikke er nogle stærke paralleller til Danmark, og hvordan det ser ud i Danmark, om vi måske kan lære lidt af hinanden på tværs, og den måde, man repræsenterer på. Jeg vil lige fortælle lidt kort om vores konference, og hvad der ligger til grund for den. For vi har valgt at lave den her konference for at tage temperaturen på medierepræsentation af minoritetsetniske borgere i Danmark. Og det kommer så lidt af den her rapport, som ansvarlig presse og RUC, Roskilde Universitet, har lavet sammen, som viser den underrepræsentation, der er af minoritetsetniske borgere i Danmark. Den viser, at 14% af den danske befolkning i 2021 var udgjort af minoritetsetniske borgere, men kun 3,5% af de minoritetsetniske borgere var nyhedskilder i de medier, som rapporten undersøgte. Og for kvinder var den underrepræsentation endnu højere. Og i den her konferencerække, der vil vi egentlig gerne gå, udover kun at snakke om underrepræsentation, vil vi også gerne snakke om, hvordan minoriteter bliver repræsenteret, og hvilken effekt en sådan underrepræsentation og misrepræsentation af minoritetsetniske borgere kan have på både på minoritetsetniske borgers oplevelse af at høre til i Danmark, men også på den måde, som vores land er skruet sammen, og de forskellige liv og måder at leve på, som vi har i Danmark, hvordan de ligesom bliver repræsenteret. Og det har vi valgt at gøre i fællesskab Mino Danmark og Jødisk Informationscenter, og i Jødisk Informationscenter, der arbejder vi med at bekæmpe antisemitisme og fordomme om jøder, ved blandt andet undervise i jødedommen og i jødisk kultur og jødisk liv, og så forsøger vi at bygge bro mellem forskellige minoritetsgrupper og til den bredere danske offentlighed. Og Mino Danmark er ligeledes en interesseorganisation, der kæmper for at styrke minoritetsetniske danskeres muligheder, stemmer og samfundsdeltagelse, og vil gerne sørge for at styrke deres bidragelse til den demokratiske samtale og indflydelse og engagement, for at styrke minoritetsetniske personers position i samfund. Så vi er glade for, at I vil være med her den her mandag aften. Igen på Zoom, som vi alle sammen elsker så højt. Muligheden for, at vi kan have Alexa med i dag, Cora Alexa Døving, som er forsker ved Holocaust Centeret i Oslo. Og hendes forskningsfelt er i minoritets- og majoritetsrelationer. Og hun har publiceret mange artikler om racisme, om islamofobi, om antisemitisme, og har blandt andet fokuseret på repræsentationer af jøder i de norske medier og racialisering af muslimer i Norge. Og i øjeblikket så leder hun forskningsprojektet Negotiating Jewish Identity, Jewish Life in 21st Century Norway. Så tusind tak for, at du vil være med her i dag, Alexa. Jeg skal huske at sige, at første del af det her oplæg vil foregå på engelsk, og så vil vi forsøge at slå over i en dansk-norsk variant. Hvis nu der er nogen derude, der har svært ved at forstå det norske eller det danske, så skriv lige i chatten. Der er en chatfunktion hernede, hvor I også kan stille spørgsmål undervejs. Det kan I også i Q&A-funktionen, og det må I meget gerne gøre. Og dem vil vi så prøve at samle op på i den sidste del af oplægget. Men hjertelig velkommen, Alexa. Det er dejligt at have dig med.
Tusind tak. Jeg synes jo det er dumt med Zoom, jeg skulle mye heller vært i København. Okay, I will switch to English. I think Norwegians understand Danish better than Danish people understand Norwegian. I don't know. But anyway, I'll try to do this in English for the sake of being understood. I will start by referring to a study I did in 2012. So it's not quite new. And it's about representations of Jews in the Norwegian media. But in the end of my talk, I would like to refer to some work in progress. I'm right now studying how Jews refer to Muslims when they express their minority identity. And as a background for that, I focus on how both Jews and Muslims are sort of the enemy, or they have a common role as the enemy in right-wing extremism. And at the same time, it has been some very important changes when it comes to discussing anti-Semitism in the last, I would say, maximum 10 years. We discuss anti-Semitism much more in relation to racism and Islamophobia, and that has also opened up for a new room for how to discuss both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. But I will start with some cases from the Norwegian media debates. So, like other Western European countries, the press in Norway is dominated by Islam and Muslims when concerned with the issue of minorities. But Judaism and Jews and the Jewish minority makes out an interesting second place, considering the very small number of Jews in Norway. Of course, Holocaust and old and new anti-Semitism, and also the covering of the conflicts in the Middle East explains this in a way. But in this talk, I will look into some of the Jewish rituals and or how Jewish rituals and the Jewish minority as a group are represented in some specific debates in the Norwegian press. And when I did the study, I had sort of four main questions that I will refer to while I present them. I asked, what sort of framing are news about the Jews given? Is it always related to the Holocaust when we say something about the Jewish minority? Or can it be described without the backdrop of Holocaust, for example? So which discourses dominate the different debates? Are notions of what it takes to be Norwegian put forward in these cases? That is very often the thing when Islam and Muslims are debated. It's very often in relation to what it takes to be Norwegian and how different they are from the Norwegian society, and how is that when the Jews are depicted in the media. And also, how do Jewish debaters themselves represent their cases or themselves, or how do they argue for a cause? So these were my sort of research questions when I started to look into how the Jewish minority is represented in the Norwegian media. When I did this study, I took used a sort of media referencing system, and I just used the words Jewish, Jews, Judaism in a 10 years period. And 5 thematic fields showed us up as the most common fields of when Judaism or the Jews are part of the media debates. It's about kosher slaughter, circumcision of male children, Israel, of course, the Holocaust, of course, and also the question of anti-Semitism. I will, of course, not talk about all of these themes. I have written on them in different publications, but I will look into the kosher and circumcision debates, and also in the end, how anti-Semitism in the press, how the discourse has changed lately. Already now, before we start looking at some of the examples, I want to draw your attention to a finding, namely that the concept of Jews or Jewishness carries very ambiguous and often oppositional meaning. It's like the words Judaism and Jews seems to associate with both victim of the Holocaust and perpetrator, like in the Middle East, and with something archaic, very old rituals, but at the same time, the Jews are very modern. It is being connected to Christianity, the roots of Christianity, and also, of course, the contrast of Christianity, and maybe most powerfully associated with Europe's shame, but also with Europe's reconstruction. Furthermore, the word Jew connotes to both citizens of the world and to a biologically defined group related to a geographical center, like in the concept of ethnic Jews, or the Jews being like one people, et folk, which is an expression used by the Jewish minority here. So the word Jew is loaded with meaning, and it is very interesting to see how difficult it is for journalists or politicians or debaters to use the word Jew and Jewish, because in the debates it is almost absent, but still the debates are about what everyone knows is Jewish customs or Jewish traditions. I will just say something very briefly about the kosher debates in Norway, because according to rules for kosher, animals cannot be stunned before slaughter, but according to Norwegian law, all animals must be stunned. And the Jewish community in Norway has not been given any special permission for not doing so. The consequence is that meat that is kosher must be imported. Debates about this, about kosher, is not big in Norway, but it pops up periodically. The most up-to-date debates came in relation to all the new halal products in the Norwegian shops, and also that EU opened up for new slaughter methods. And then it sort of came up a big and very heated debate in Norway. The interesting thing, or I can be quite short about this, but if one sees the expressions that were used in the slaughter debate, it's like the rabbi cuts the throat of an animal in agony. It's used words like superstition and foreignness. This has nothing to do with the Norwegian society. And it's called, it was like headings like ritualized inhumanity. That was a heading in one of the biggest Norwegian newspapers. So both kosher and halal was described as practices in direct contrast to the ideals of the European Enlightenment, which according to quite a lot of the authors was a turning point in relation to the treatment of animals. I will just quote from one of the debaters. He wrote that in parallel with the requirement of animal welfare, the idea emerged that man destroys himself by treating animals in a cruel manner. We may lose our humanity, the authors wrote, and thereby they made it quite explicit that kosher slaughtering does not only damages the animals, but also corrupts our humanity. Very surprisingly few debaters pointed to the perspective of discrimination or minority rights. It was only one voice from the Jewish community, and she referred to the issue of discrimination. She pointed out that the Sami people, they are granted the right to reindeer slaughter without anesthesia and only using a knife. So you had some elements of minority rights popping up. But mostly it was this Western civilization against barbaric methods. And some of the quotes on this slide is also taken from the debates on circumcision. And to cut the foreskin of defenseless children gives a pretty good idea of how most of the debaters argued in a way. The biggest debate was in 2011, but we had one now in 2018. And in 2011, it started because the Ministry of Health and Care Services expressed a desire to regulate circumcision of male children. And this started a big debate with both Jewish and Muslim voices, but also quite many politicians and also health workers joined in the debates. The circumcision debate included several established discourses, and I will say something shortly about the three of them because that sort of says something about one of my research questions, namely how are news about the Jews framed? When it came to circumcision, it was framed in the light of three different discourses. But just have a look again at this slide before I move it, and just see in none of these expressions were the word Jews or Jewish put in front of it. So Jewish ritualized inhumanity, Jewish barbaric methods, no place in the Norwegian reality for Jewish rituals or Jewish monstrous practices that would be anti-Semitic at once. And because everyone knew that it was a tradition that both Jews and Muslims shared, the word Muslim or Islamic were not used either. So they were sort of concentrating on the practice, but not connecting it to any minority group, which was quite strange in a way. So I'll just look quickly into the discourses when circumcision was debated in Norway. And of course, the medical discourse was the broadest, the biggest one. So circumcision was primarily debated with references to health and medical science. And it was also referred to as a practice in Norwegian, a tradition, that was connected to Judaism and Islam, but the medical discourse did not really mention Jews or Muslims either. They just talked about this shik, this thing, this tradition. But also actually Jewish and Muslim debaters themselves used medical arguments, just saying it was circumcision is a gain for public health. They didn't really speak about circumcision as an important Jewish rituals, meaning something special for Jewish identity. Anyway, representative for a medical and scientific way of argumenting was, for example, 3 Norwegian quite famous health workers, psychiatrists. They worked at a Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress. They were often engaging in different public debates, so they were well known. They wrote things like, it's important to note that circumcisions of boys can lead to some of the same complications known to the genital mutilation of girls, and this has no place in the Norwegian reality. Sexuality also made up a major reference in the medical discourse. A very well-known and popular sexologist claimed under the heading Intervention and Abuse that circumcision of male children is a violation of genital and sexual integrity. She also stated that today we would never accept that a religious group, so she doesn't say Jews, she doesn't say Muslims, just a religious group, coined the removal of healthy organs as part of their religious practice, and that only to maintain a harmful ritual. So she also expressed and wrote that this ritual belongs to the darkness of the past. Yeah, so you get the picture in the medical debates. And of course, it was connected to what is the best for the child, what is the child's interest. And there it also overlaps with the human rights discourse and children's right to sort of decide or to not having things done with their body. And especially one well-known Norwegian politician, Klinge is her name, she wrote that this was a monstrous practice and that children got identity marking in the form of religious symbols inscribed onto their body, just like a sect. And also asked questions about parents willing to inflict their children with an irreversible sign of their faith. She also called this a brennmerke, like something that's burned into your skin, which gave me some association to burning signs given to, or like the tattooing of numbers in Auschwitz. The way she wrote it made some unpleasant associations, at least for me. Okay, the last discourse that this debate had as a framing was what we can call a minority and identity discourse, and statements about circumcision were put into a minority rights discourse. This was not so common, and it was mainly Jewish and Muslim debaters who pointed to the right for protection according to the United Nations minority rights, and also that the debates had shown a lack of acceptance of plurality in the Norwegian society. And they also used, as a minority, we have the right to. We had especially one trio of 2 Jewish doctors and 1 Muslim doctor who wrote together. And they started by referring to medical facts, but then in the end of the debates, they turned to these minority right arguments. But anyway, to sort of sum up a little bit, the broad use of references to sort of the European Enlightenment and the humanity clearly portray Jewish traditions as being an alien element in an otherwise illuminated country, Norway, of course. So both in the kosher debate and especially also in the circumcision debate, the arguments placed the debate in the context of opposition between tradition and modernity, between religion and civilization, and also what was very very often used was the concept of time. It was used to depict the Jewish community as very, very old-fashioned, almost antiquarian, as something that does not really belong in the modern area. And by time, it has to change. So, and that is quite new actually in Norway, because when it comes to, it's usually the Muslims who's portrayed as very, very old-fashioned and not quite modern. But in these debates, definitely Judaism as such were very easily read as something very, very old, not really belonging in the contemporary world, to say it that way. So I just also want to remind you again about what I said in the beginning that I found very, very interesting, is that the absence of the direct references to Judaism, Jewishness, or Jews. And the same goes actually for Muslims and Islam. But I think that is just because they share this ritual with the Jews, because in other debates, the Muslims are often referred to very, very direct. Either no one is addressed or the word minority is used. We have to look at damaging minority practices, like one author expressed it. So again, as long as the J word is absent, the very harsh language of exclusion is kept in these debates. It is not very typical Norwegian mainstream newspapers to have these harsh expressions towards a minority group. So something about both kosher and circumcision by male children pointed to something, and I don't know. I don't know why, but it was really a harsh language. But as you can see, the J word, or the word Jew, is kept out of it, and I think that is because the knowledge of anti-Semitism regulates the language in a way. Other characteristics with the debates is also that it was no room for religious arguments. I mean, it's hopeless to say that we do this because it's important for me to show that I am believe in this and that, or I am part of, it has to do with identity, or it has to do with being part of a religious community. So also the press having this, you have to use a secular language and use secular arguments to be taken seriously in a debate, I think. I think that's why so few Jews and Muslims used religious arguments. They used medical arguments or minority arguments, not religious arguments. Also, the phrase about the child's best interest illustrates really the hegemonic position of medicine and of sort of health and what's healthy. And also, of course, as I said, Jewish customs are written about as if they not really belong in the present. But also Jewish debaters did not refer to a Jewish identity as part of their arguments in the circumcision debate. They turned to international minority rights and to general principles of a tolerant and multicultural society. And I do think that the language of minority rights gives Jews the opportunity to argue their case without referring to their explicit Jewish identity in a way. They are part of a much bigger universal trend where minorities has the right to take care of their tradition, and that this right is part of a universal human rights discourse. So I argue that when they refer to a political idea of equal rights for minorities, spokesmen for the Jews can rely on an ideology developed external to their own group. And I think that felt that they sort of were protected in a way from being accused of, oh, you Jews, you just care about yourself or something like that. Anyway, I will jump to some other and newer examples. And it's not so directly connected to specific media debates, but it is connected to changes in the discourses on anti-Semitism. I mean, before 2011, 2012, you could hardly mention anti-Semitism in the same sentence as Islamophobia. You were accused of relativizing anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism was something unique, and you couldn't sort of use it in a general debate on racism. Today, this has shifted totally, and I think, and it must have, obviously, something to do with the empirical facts that both the Jews and the Muslims are sort of Europe's other, that they have an overlapping role as enemies within far-right extremist ideology. So in the press, the Muslims and the Jew are a sort of pair. Sometimes they have an overlapping role, both being a minority that someone hates, and on the other side they are also represented or depicted as in an opposing relationship. Then it's mostly when it refers to anti-Semitism among Muslims or the Middle East conflict. This picture is from 2019, and it was when a far-right extremist terrorist was unable to get into the synagogue door, you can see on the picture. Then he jumped into his car and he drove to a Turkish kebab restaurant, and there he stopped, aimed at the glass window and opened fire. This was then in Halle in Germany, I'm sure you won't remember. But it is just one of numerous examples of an act of terror motivated by an image or portrayal of an enemy that encompasses both the Jew and the Muslim. But the interesting thing about this was a big news. This was covered in all the European newspapers, also the Norwegians. But in Germany, a very special debate also came out of it, because despite of the image of the enemy, the terrorist ended up killing a woman who just accidentally happened to be passing by the synagogue, and also a manual laborer who was in the kebab cafe having his lunch break. So these two victims, they were called the Bio-German by the nationalistic and immigration skeptic party Alternative für Deutschland. So the spokesmen from the party asserted that the emphasis by news focused too much on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and forgot about the real Germans who had been the real victims of the attack. So my point here is just that that the word Bio-German in this context was of course referred to the ideas about who are the real Germans, and they were the ones killed even if he tried to kill someone who wasn't a real ethnic Germans. But it all sort of started a big debate in Germany about, so Jews and Muslims were part of a debate about who are Europe's first and who are Europe's second citizens, in a way. So, but of course, at the same time, and that is important to remember, when right-wing extremism is covered in the media, it is not always that Muslims and Jews are have this overlapping role. Quite often, the Jews are used as a strawman in the way, we have to protect the Jews is used as an argument against the Muslim presence in Europe. So it's complicated how Jews and Muslims are used up against each other. But anyway, I will soon be done now. I just wanted to show you or put the focus on that the general shift in how we look at anti-Semitism that now opens up for comparing it with other kinds of racism also has done something with the boundaries between Jews and Muslims, that it is easier, I think, for Muslims and Jews to relate in a way to each other. We have this broad quantitative survey in Norway where we ask Jews and Muslims if they think they could cooperate against prejudices or if they have some common experiences. And it's between almost 90% in both groups say yes, we should cooperate more and we have similar experiences. So my argument that in the work I'm doing now is that these discourses on racism, broadly speaking, has made some new rooms for how to express Jewish identity in relation to the Muslims. Very quick, this picture is from, when was it again? Anyway, it was after the terror attack on a synagogue in Copenhagen that young Muslims in Norway organized what they call the peace ring around the synagogue to show the Jewish minority that the Muslims would protect them. And as an answer to that, the rabbi of the synagogue, he held a speech and he started his speech by saying Allah Akbar. And then he went on to say, oh, we have so much in common, etc., etc. But just the symbolic effect of him using this Allahu Akbar, that in Norway it's very much associated with suicide bombers. It was a very very expressive and strong way of saying that we share something. We are both minorities and we have religious roots connecting us, but we are also vulnerable and need to protect each other. This is another example when Sian, you have them in Denmark too, Stop Islamization of Norway. This one, you have the where they burn the Quran. Also, some Jews made a Facebook thing saying that this is how we Jews were depicted in the 1930s. Here's another example of, this is more like both identification with the Muslim, but also opposition. This is a famous Jewish TV woman. She makes food on television. And the other one is a Muslim rapper, and he said, "Fuck the Jews" from the stage. It was in some sort of context. I don't remember exactly what context, what the situation was, but anyway. But she wrote in the article in the newspaper the day after and said to him, "People who hate Jews often also hate other minorities. Think about that in the next time you're at work and yell 'fuck the Jews.'" So at the same time as she is angry with him and also afraid of Muslim anti-Semitism, she appeals to some sort of minority solidarity, and we are both minorities, remember that, in a way. So yeah, basically I just have to look at the time because I feel I'm talking, and yes, I am. But well, my point is that I have collected different examples from public speeches and from the media in which Jewish voices express kinds of solidarity with the Muslims because they are both minorities and have some of the same experiences on the one side, and on the other side it's some sort of oppositions concerning anti-Semitism, and of course when it comes to the Middle East conflict. I think I'll stop there, so we'll have a little bit of time for questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for an interesting talk. And yes, I think we also have a question actually in the Q&A section. So we can maybe start with there, if that's all right with you.
Yes.
So the question is, I'll just read it up in Danish, if that's okay.
Yes. Am I?
Hvorfor tror du, the question is from a person named Lena.
Yeah.
Hvorfor tror du, at man som skribent undgår at bruge ord som jødedom og jødisk sammenlignet med emner om islam? Så forstår jeg det, som hun mener, at man bruger ord som islam og muslimer. Er man i højere grad bange for at blive anklaget for antisemitisme end islamofobi i danske medier?
Ja.
Og hvorfor vil du måske sætte på, hvordan
jo, altså for det første har hun helt rett at man er mye reddere for å bli anklaget for antisemitisme enn for islamofobi. Så jeg tror at når de ikke brukte ordet muslimske ritualer, muslimske barbariske ritualer, så er det fordi at alle visste at det handlet om ritualer som var både jødiske og muslimske. Så da var det bedre å bare snakke om ritualer, eller barbariske ritualer, uten å knytte det til en minoritetsgruppe. Og det er jo slett ikke alltid at det er vanskelig å bruke jøder og jødedom, fordi flere saker i det norske mediebildet handler jo om minnekultur etter Holocaust, eller det handler om nye bøker om den jødiske minoriteten, eller om en utstilling på Jødisk museum. Da bruker man selvfølgelig ordet jøde og jødisk. Men det er begreper som er ladet med tung mening. Det er jøde og jødedom. Og Holocaust er en konstant resonans på en måte. Og derfor så var det, og antisemitisme og holocaust er på en måte noe som gjør at man er liksom forsiktige. Men det som var interessant med disse debattene med korser og med omskjæringsritualet, er at det forsvant. Den resonansen ble borte. Det ble et veldig sånn det vestlige sivilisasjon, barnets rettigheter, medisin, helse, ble hele liksom diskursflaten, og alt som hadde med at noe var jødisk eller noe var en minoritetstradisjon, ble på en måte fjernet da, eller falt bort.
Det er en meget spændende dynamik, tænker jeg også, især i forhold til omskæringsdiskussion i Danmark. Så tænker jeg også, at der har været situationer, hvor nogle religiøse fællesskaber, altså for eksempel muslimer, har overladt debatten til jøderne i forhold til sådan en samtale. Og det på baggrund af selvfølgelig fakta som Holocaust, altså europæisk fælles historie og fælles skam over en hændelse, mørk hændelse som det, som selvfølgelig påvirker langt ud i fremtiden. Og så påvirker det selvfølgelig også journalisters portrættering eller håndtering af emner, der har at gøre med det folk, der blev masseudryddet for så mange år siden. Kan du tale lidt om, hvordan det måske fungerer sådan med et intrareligiøst samarbejde omkring nogle emner, som kan virke for den ene part, lad os sige for muslimerne, meget problematiske nævne, fordi så bliver det barbarisk, men hos andre, for jøderne, så er der en anden måde at håndtere det for. Og hvordan kan man som journalist måske prøve at gøre op, ikke gøre op nødvendigvis, men i hvert fald at prøve at sætte nogle friere og lige rammer, for at personer også med muslimsk baggrund kan tale om de samme emner.
Ja, det der med at man har overlatt debatten til jødene, det har jeg også hørt, men det har jeg hørt i USA faktisk. I Norge så er det jo en god del leger med muslimsk bakgrunn som deltok i debatten. Og de deltok også tidvis sammen med jødiske debattanter. Men det var ingen sånn samling rundt minoritetsrettigheter, for eksempel. Det var bare disse enkeltstående kronikkene, kaller dere kronikk, ja, leserinnlegg og kronikk i avisene. Og det intrareligiøse arbeidet i Norge, det er egentlig ganske godt etablert med noe som heter Samarbeidsrådet for tros- og livssynssamfunn. Og de har samarbeidet om en god del fordommer og andre ting, men akkurat når det gjaldt omskjæringsritualene, så var det ingen, så vidt jeg har fått med meg i hvert fall, arrangementer av liksom sånn interreligiøst arbeid hvor man diskuterte dette. Og jeg tror det har litt med at behovene og praksisen er ganske ulik blant jøder og muslimer. For denne debatten som startet i Norge, den startet selvfølgelig med en bekymring knyttet til muslimske barn. Fordi for det første er det så få jødiske guttebarn som omskjæres i Norge per år, mens det er mange muslimer. Samtidig så har systemene i Norge er jo på en måte, du har veldig mange muslimske leger som gjør det inngrepet, så det er ikke så vanskelig å få det gjort. Men i den jødiske minoriteten er det knyttet til synagogen, og at man får en mohell fra England som kommer hit og gjør det. Så de har også to helt ulike praksiser og ulike behov rundt selve ritualet. Det kan hende at det er en grunn til at det ikke var mer samarbeid mellom jøder og muslimer. Men så er det jo også dette at det er et ubehagelig og vanskelig tema å snakke om. Det var veldig tydelig, fordi det er jo et inngrep på kroppen til barnet ditt. Og når det er vanskelig å forklare det, og det er derfor jeg synes også det var litt interessant at det ikke er noe rom i mediene til å si dette er eksistensielle grunner til at vi ønsker å gjøre det. Dette handler om min identitet som jøde, og det er argumenter som er litt lettere å komme med i dag, men da jeg så på den debatten i 2012, så var det ingen nesten som kom med det argumentet. Men det er jo antageligvis den egentlige årsaken. Og nå er det akkurat en kollega av meg som har intervjuet jødiske foreldre guttebarnforeldre, om hvordan de tok avgjørelsen om de skulle omskjære eller ikke. Og det hun fant var at det er et rituale med en omkostning. Det er vanskelig fordi den offentlige debatten har vært så negativ, så føles det også vanskelig å velge det. Noen velger det bort, og noen velger det, men synes det er vanskelig. Disse debattene har nok også påvirket det norske samfunnet, for vi har hatt flere, nå har det vært 2 tilfeller som hun dokumenterte fra i fjor, at jøder som skulle leie et lokale til festen etterpå, når de som eier lokalet fikk høre at det var i forbindelse med omskjæringsritualet på et guttebarn, så trakk de seg og sa de fikk ikke leie det likevel. Og det jo også et eksempel på hvordan mediedebattene med på å forme en opinion, eller forme forestillinger om en minoritet, som også får en konsekvens i en faktisk diskriminerende handling. Da. Ja, nå snakket jeg meg kanskje litt vekk fra hovedspørsmålet, men...
Jeg kom til at tænke på i forbindelse med Nannas spørgsmål, at Alexa, jeg ved, du har skrevet blandt andet om islamofobi i den norske debat, og ret mig, hvis jeg tager fejl om, hvordan at der egentlig har eksisteret islamofobi, før at man begyndte at kalde det islamofobi i medierne. Og i forbindelse med det her, Nanna nævner med, at man måske mere bange for, eller i hvert fald er større... Der større mulighed for at blive kaldt antisemit end islamofob. Men det måske også har noget at gøre med, at islamofobi ikke har vundet indpas endnu i en offentlig debat, at det mere i en eller anden forstand legitimt at kritisere muslimer, uden at man har givet det et navn endnu, selvom det jo har et navn, islamofobi, hvor at, jeg ved, både Norge har en handlingsplan mod antisemitisme, og det har vi også i Danmark nu.
Men nu har vi fått en mot... De bruker ikke islamofobi, men de har kalt det handlingsplan mot diskriminering av muslimer.
Okay, ja, men tror du måske, det ville gøre en forskel, hvis man brugte et lidt mere, det er måske forkert at kalde det et catch, men et ord, der er lidt mere præcist, og lidt mere, for eksempel også i kontekst af, at man har et ord som antisemitisme, der, som er bredt anerkendt som et problem, og har historiske rødder og så videre.
Ja. Ikke sant, da vi i Norge hadde terror 22. juli 2011, som drepte Arbeiderparti-ungdom, fordi de hadde sluppet inn muslimene, så ble jo offentligheten kjent med de konspirasjonsforestillingene, som liksom en av islamofobiens hovedtroper. Og da ble jo islamofobi løftet opp som sammenlignbar med konspirasjonsmyter om jødene i antisemitismen. Uten å gjøre det til det samme, så ble det en åpning for begrepet islamofobi. Men så forsvant det litt igjen fra norsk offentlighet. Og jeg tror at en av grunnene til at folk, eller at det er en mye mer varsellampe mot å si noe som er antisemittisk enn noe som er islamofobi, er også at antisemittisme har jo hele historiens tyngde så klart, men det er også veldig gjenkjent at det er rasistisk mot jøder å være antisemitt. Mens i norsk offentlighet har man en slags forestilling om at islamofobi, da er man på en måte bare kritisk mot islam og muslimer. Det har ikke noe med rasisme å gjøre. Sånn at jeg tror også at det rommet for å uttrykke seg rasistisk mot muslimer, da, eller gjennom islamofobe forestillinger, det blir ikke gjenkjent som så alvorlig som det er. Og jeg vil bare si, for vi har jo gjort en stor befolkningsundersøkelse om holdninger til jøder og holdninger til muslimer. Og antisemittiske fordommer finnes, ja, men de er veldig, veldig lav. Liksom, det er noe sånn 8% av befolkningen som har. Mens flere av fordommene mot muslimer, for eksempel spørsmålet muslimer er mer voldelige enn andre, 40% svarer seg enig. Muslimer vil ikke integrere, 38% sier de er enig. Så dette er veldig høye tall vi har i Norge. Samtidig så er fordommer, samtidig så er det få konflikter mellom ulike grupperinger i Norge, sammenlignet med i hvert fall Sverige. Og på de samme undersøkelsene så svarer også over 80% at muslimer er gode borgere i Norge. Så det er liksom, ja, du finner begge deler i den undersøkelsen, men at folk føler at de kan si at muslimer vil ikke integreres, eller muslimer ønsker å overta Europa, når 36% svarer ja på det, så viser jo det også at folk ikke kjenner igjen at dette eller hva det, hvor alvorlig den beskyldningen tror jeg da. Kan være jeg naiv, og at de kjenner det igjen og bare rett og slett islamofobe, men så stor del av befolkningen, det tenker jeg at det fortsatt en ganske lav forståelse av hva islamofobi Og jeg mener jo at nettopp kunnskap om antisemitisme kan bidra til å skape en ordentlig forståelse for sånne gruppefiendtlige forestillinger, da, sånn som islamofobi
Altså, så du tænker, at viden om antisemitisme kan bruges til, at man kan lave de her paralleller til andre former for diskrimination, og sige, at uden og det sådan, hvordan tænker du, at det ser ud?
Nei, altså, nå det for eksempel store forskjeller også på ulike, altså fordommer mot ulike grupper, og selvfølgelig Holocaust jo kvintessensen av rasisme, det rasisme med et dødelig utfall. Men det jo mange som også har sagt at ja, men den forestillingen om eller den rasismen med hierarkisering av mennesker, den har du ikke i islamofobien, men jo, det har man. Og det å se på de forestillingene om jøden som blomstret opp i mellomkrigstiden, hvor jødens mentalitet, jødens væremåte ble definert, og hadde uttrykk så like som i dag. Jøder vil ikke integreres, jøder ikke lojale, jøder følger en autoritær gud og kan derfor ikke kjenne humanisme. Alle disse forestillingene finner du igjen i islamofobien. Sånn at det ikke å si at alt likt, for det mange forskjeller, men det å bruke antisemitisme som kilde nettopp fordi den også så ulike perioder, og alle de der mekanismene for å skape et fiendebilde, og bli kjent med dem gjennom antisemitisme vil gi, tror jeg, mye viktig kunnskap til også fordommer mer generelt da, og mot andre grupper. Ja.
Fedt, Alexa. Tusind tak. Jeg tror, vi ved at nå til slut af eventet. Jeg vil sige tusind tak først og fremmest for et rigtig interessant oplæg, Alexa, og jeg vil sige mange tak til alle, der kommet for at lytte med. Vi kommer til at uploade alle vores episoder, vores 3 Zoom-episoder som podcast. Det kommer her om nogle uger, vil jeg tænke, hvor vi lige finder ud af, hvordan det skal gøres bedst. Og sidst men ikke mindst, så har vi jo vores fysiske event, der handler om medierepræsentation af minoritetsetniske borgere i Danmark. Den 6. oktober, her på torsdag, klokken 5:30 på Københavns Hovedbibliotek, hvor I alle sammen meget velkommen til at komme og bringe venner med. Det kommer så til at være en paneldebat mellem 4 personer fra 4 forskellige organisationer og enkeltindivider, der fortæller lidt om deres arbejde med minoritetsetnisk repræsentation, deres udfordringer, muligheder og lignende. Så kom endelig med til at debattere. Og tusind tak igen, Alexa. Og ja, tak for at I vil være med.
Tak for mig. Tusind tak for mig.
Yes. Ha' en god dag.
Ha' det bra. Hej.
Hej.